Okay, good morning Year 10. So we're looking at the second lesson for the poem My Parents, which is focusing on our writing skills, and we're really working on refining our expression, refining our writing skills to make concrete points, so to make sure that our points are really clear. Our lesson objective today is to be able to explain the primary interpretation of a quotation using these techniques, the phrase in brief and in short. So when I'm talking about a primary interpretation, I'm talking about that first interpretation before you go into those deeper sort of layers and meanings. What that first primary means first, that first interpretation of the poem. So that's the skill we're going to be building on today. Just to recap then, when we explored the poem last lesson, we were looking at this lesson objective, which was to explore how a poet presents the experience of bullying in childhood through the use of similes and metaphors. Just a quick overview of what we're going to be doing this session. We're going to do a writing warm-up, just refamiliarising ourselves with the key ideas within the poem. We're going to explore the poem in a bit more detail. We're going to look at the big idea within the poem, write our thesis statement, which you're used to by now. You've done it in the last few lessons, so we'll be writing our thesis statements, making sure we're writing really good, clear topic sentences, and then we're going to be looking at that technique of using in brief and in short for our primary interpretation, and then I will go through a worked example with you. Okay, so let's warm up our writing. Okay, I would like you, I'll just move that, to answer these questions. So these all link to the themes within the poem. So I'd like you to finish off these sentences. There's 5 in total. I've put in green here some of that key versatile vocabulary that we've been looking at. I want you to try and think about using that vocabulary when we're thinking about this poem. So it says the poem could be seen as emotional because the speaker of the poem could be considered to be vulnerable because the speaker of the poem feels inferior to the bullies when, to give an example of when that happens. However, the speaker's fear and sense of inferiority is not ephemeral because, and then the poet shows, mistake there, the poet shows bullying can be immoral because. So we've got the words emotional, vulnerable, inferior, ephemeral and immoral. How does all that link to the poem that we were looking at yesterday, called My Parents? That's just a quick recap of the poem. And these were the 3 sort of key similes that we were looking at. So remember, the poem was about the speaker, we got the impression, was a child. Parents wouldn't allow him to play with other children who were rough. They're trying to protect him maybe. These children were told 3 words like stone. We got a sense of poverty, that they ran around in rags, but they were quite free and they had some freedom. We get the impression that they were quite strong, but we get some examples of them bullying him, okay, throwing the words, their muscles like iron, so physical bullying. And then we had a slight change in tone at the end where here he's made to feel quite inferior to them, but then we get a sense of actually he's trying to be better than them, and a sense maybe of superiority. So that's just a quick warm up of the poem. Let's apply that now to these questions. Okay, I'm going to give you 3 minutes, go. Okay, so we'll make sure you're writing down these sentences and finishing them off, really considering this key vocabulary. Minute and a half left. Think about that key theme of bullying. How can that be seen as emotional? How can it make somebody feel vulnerable? How does he feel vulnerable in the poem? A sense of inferiority. Ephemeral, how maybe his fear that he has in that second stanza doesn't last. So ephemeral doesn't last because, so what happens in that last stanza? And then we get this sort of moral viewpoint of bullying. Okay, 50 seconds. Okay, all right, so I hope you've got some really good ideas there, and that's going to help us when it comes on to the next part of this task. Okay, so thinking about the poem now in a bit more detail. So we're looking at our because, but and so sentences. I love these because it really gets you thinking about the poem in a lot of detail. So just linking it to this idea of bullying, we've got the first sentence. The narrator feels inferior, that key vocabulary, to the other children because. So at what point in the poem does the narrator feel inferior to the other children? Okay, second sentence. The narrator feels inferior to the other children, so. Okay, so maybe so capture the emotions there. What's his reaction to it? And then the final one, the narrator feels inferior to the other children, but, and I think this but here is a really nice opportunity for you to consider that change in tone in that very last stanza. Okay, so you've got 3 sentences there. We're looking at the narrator feels inferior to the other children because, so, and but. Okay, so 3 sentences, give you 2 minutes, go. there's your 2 minutes. Great stuff. Okay, so hopefully you've got some really nice ideas down there now. Okay, so for our writing test today, we're going to focus on this question. This is our big question. How does the poet present the experience of bullying in childhood? So no surprises there. It's exactly what we looked at yesterday. It's that key theme of bullying. So how, now we're thinking about how, what techniques do they use to present the experience of bullying? What type of experience does the poet show us? Okay, so the big idea and the question. Okay, so on the surface, the poem My Parents is about. Okay, I'd like you to write that sentence. Now, this is some of the vocabulary I'd like you to perhaps try and use in there. So on the surface, the poem My Parents is about an emotional experience of bullying. Okay. However, if you delve deeper, so what's that second layer of meaning? It's an extended metaphor for, I've just jotted down a couple of our keywords there about morality. So it's moral and immoral behaviour. There's a real sense that the narrator tries to do the right thing at the end. Okay, so capturing this short little paragraph here will really help you figure out your big idea, your concept that you're going to write about for the next part. So I'm going to give you a 2 minutes because I want you to do this properly. On the surface, the poem My Parents is about. So what's your impression of that poem? Try and use some of this key vocabulary if you can. However, if you delve deeper, it is an extended metaphor for, so what's that second layer of meaning in there? Okay, go. Okay, so coming to the end of that time, let's move on. Okay, so we're coming up to writing our thesis statements, and remember the question is how does the poet present the experience of bullying in childhood? How does the poet present the theme of bullying? Okay, so we're going to introduce the poet now in a really nice well-phrased sentence. So it says, in the poem, My Parents, Spender, that's the name of the poet, explores the idea of, so what's your first idea? Okay, try and use some of those, the ideas in the question, so the experience of bullying. Colon, it reveals, what's your first idea? Think back to some of the questions that you've warmed up here, okay, about bullying being emotional, vulnerable, okay, his fear being ephemeral, okay, so use some of that that you've just planned. Okay, to plot out those 3 ideas. Okay, so everyone's going to come up with slightly different ideas. That's absolutely fine. So it reveals what's your first idea, second idea, and finally your third idea. Okay, I am going to walk through this in terms of a worked example, but I just wanted to give you an outline of the direction that we're going to. Okay, we'll come back to this in a moment. We're going to use our really clear topic sentences. Clearly, in stanza 1, Spender presents the narrator's experience of bullying as, think about your first idea, okay, use some of that vocabulary, as emotional, okay, as a sense of inferiority, any of those would do, okay, through the simile, and then we're going to refer to simile 1. So simile 1 was those words like stone. Now we're going to use that keyword that we're looking at today, in brief. Okay, we're going to do our primary analysis of that quotation. So in brief, this shows, so think about your notes, look at your notes yesterday from words like stone. In brief, what would that show? Okay, don't write anything yet, we're going to come back to this in a moment. I'm just giving you an overview of the direction that we're going in. Okay, and then secondly, we've got a second topic sentence. Evidently, this is reinforced in stanza 2, so another keyword there, reinforced in stanza 2 through the simile, and then you're going to talk about simile 2, which was I feared their muscles like iron, okay, muscles feared like tigers and muscles like iron. In short, so that's our second phrase that we're looking at today. So in short, this shows just a really simple first impression of that quotation. What is that quotation? Muscles like iron showing us. Okay, you could perhaps use that idea of inferiority there. Okay, sense of fear perhaps. And then our third topic sentence, so again using these key clear words. So finally we observe a slight shift in tone in the closing stanza, revealed through the simile, and then that's the opportunity to put our third simile down, which was like bark like dogs at my world. Okay, bark like dogs at my world. And then we're gonna again just do an overview of what that quotation is showing us. In brief, this shows, and then go through that. And then a final little conclusion at the end. In other words, the speaker of the poem shows the reader that bullying in childhood is, and then you can capture some of your big ideas here using this vocabulary. Okay, so that is what we're going to be producing. Okay, I'll just zoom in. So hopefully by the end of the lesson, that's where you'll have got to. I'm just going to go through a worked example now, and I've done this in relation to kids, the poem that we've looked at recently. So the question when we looked at kids was, how does Armitage present the idea of growing up in kids? Okay, so it was very much this about the theme of growing up rather than bullying. Okay, so I'm just going to start with my thesis statement. In the poem Kids, Armitage presents the idea of growing up as volatile, so that key vocabulary there, and full of changes, colon. It reveals exterior changes, so we're getting that vocabulary in, interior changes, and finally changes in key relationships. So that's my idea 1, idea 2, and idea 3. So all of this here is that thesis statement. So you can see how it looks as a paragraph. Okay, then I've got my topic sentence. Clearly, in the beginning of the poem, Armitage, that's the name of the poet, presents growing up as full of, and then I've mixed up my order a little bit here, but pick one of my ideas. Okay, so I started with interior changes. Through the simile, he was like a father to me. In brief, so that's our key skill that we're looking at today. The past tense use of was shows us that the narrator no longer feels this way about the relationship. Okay, so all I've done is just that primary interpretation of that quotation. I'm not looking at the layers of meaning just yet. I'm just using in brief to show the exam that first understanding of the poem. Okay. Evidently, my second point, the poem also shows growing up to be full of exterior changes, shown in the adjectives I'm taller, harder, stronger, older. That's my second quotation. And then this phrase again, in short, this primary overview of what's happening in that quotation. In short, this shows us that within childhood, you experience a number of physical changes as you grow, which can also change your outlooks and perspective. So we're getting to this idea that as you grow physically, it also changes you emotionally and changes your outlook on life. Finally, we observe a change in key relationships when growing up, which is reinforced in the metaphor. So this is my third quote. I'm not playing ball boy any longer. In brief, so this key skill again, this shows a change in the narrator's outlook as he vows not to play second place to Batman again. So if we just think about that first, that lesson objective that we're looking at today, which is to explain the primary interpretation of a quotation using in brief and in short. So you can see how I've done that first interpretation of a poem, not necessarily at this point looking at all the layers of meaning that will come once you've started to get to grips with this idea of interpreting the poem first of all. Okay, so you can see how I've used in brief, in short, and in brief again there. Okay, so a little interpretation of what that poem is showing us. Okay, so there's my worked example, so you can see how it all fits together. I want you now to use this as your writing frame. Okay, and I would like you can pause the video. Okay, hopefully you can capture it all there. Okay, you can pause the video, and that is the writing frame that you need to go through. So your thesis statement, in the poem My Parents, Spender explores the idea of bullying in childhood. It reveals what's your first idea, second idea, and finally, what's your third idea? And really look through the notes that you've done today and those warm-up exercises. It's really going to help you. Topic sentence. Clearly, in stanzas 1, Spender presents the narrator's experience of bullying as, use some of your vocabulary, through the simile. First simile that we looked at yesterday. Look at your notes, look at the poem again. In brief, this shows what's that primary interpretation of that quotation. Next point. Evidently, this is reinforced in stanza 2 through the simile. Use that second simile we analysed yesterday. In short, this shows. Okay, so that primary interpretation of that poem. Finally, we observe a slight shift in tone in the closing stanza revealed through the simile. In brief, this shows, okay, that again, that primary interpretation, and then a really small conclusion at the end here. In other words, the speaker of the poem shows the reader that bullying in childhood is, and then use some of that quotation, vocabulary. Okay, alright, thank you Year 10. Look forward to seeing those responses.